Welcome to the Unhurried Living Podcast. We're sharing leadership conversations to help you develop unhurried rhythms of rest and work. We're helping you overcome hurry and make time for what matters most. And now, enjoy today's episode. Hey friends, welcome to episode 242 of the podcast. My name's Alan, and I'm so glad you've joined me here. I'm hopeful that our time together will help you rediscover an unhurried way of life and leadership. Now, we've talked often here about the continual challenge of how our devices tend to train us in hurry and distraction. In fact, in episode 103, Managing Our Omnipresent Smartphones, I shared the story of an 8-day retreat where I found myself wrestling with how attached to my smartphone I'd become. You might enjoy going back to that episode after you finish listening to this one. Now, today, I'm talking with a new friend, Heath Wilson, who is the co-founder of a company called Arrow. They've developed a resource and an app that will help you manage how you engage as a family with your smartphones. It's designed to help us reduce screen time by making it both easy and fun to put down our phones. Now, if you're a new listener, welcome to the podcast. If you find these episodes helpful, would you please follow, rate, and review? And be sure to share this podcast with your friends. Now, let's dive into my conversation with Heath Wilson, co-founder of Arrow. On today's Unhurried Living podcast, I'm pleased to welcome Heath Wilson, co-founder of a company called Arrow. Thank you, Heath, for joining me in this conversation.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I've been looking forward to it. So today's sort of a unique episode because usually I'm talking with an author about a book, but today we get to talk about a resource that you and a friend have developed. It helps us navigate how we relate to our smartphones. Before we get to any of that, I wonder if you could just share a little of your journey that brought you to this place.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first I want to say thank you to you as well. I somehow, and I don't recall, maybe ran across a blog post or something about unhurried living, quickly bought the devotional, been digging into it all year. I'm on a 38 or 39 day streak right now, digging into that along with my Bible reading. So it's been an encouragement to me. And as I've dug more into your mission and your leadership, just really thankful that you're doing what you're doing. So thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. It's great to have you. Yeah, I'd love to hear your story.
Yeah, so my story goes back all the way to 2000. I call myself an accidental entrepreneur. I went out to lunch one day with some buddies. We had a job. We complained a lot about our job, and we said, well, let's go build something to solve, what we're complaining about. I was 26, didn't know anything about anything. And I guess that was kind of nice. Naivety was beautiful. And then I said, well, yeah, let's go start a business. If it fails, I'll get a job. Well, that turned into something well beyond our dreams and expectations. We grew from 4 people to 500 with offices all over the world. We just kind of right place, right time, a few good decisions along the way. But what's interesting about that story is I got wrapped up in the identity of being an entrepreneur. And along the way, I got married that same year, 2000. We have 4 kids. So I was busy, running a business, having a family. But the truth was I was running a business and my family was suffering and I was sacrificing those relationships. So fast forward a bunch of years, it started to feel some tension particularly around how much I worked. Technology became more and more intrusive, let's call it, in my life. From a simple laptop to an iPad to, the phone that we have today. And I recall distinctly, I'll tell you a quick story. So I've got twins. They're now 16, but in 5th grade, my son was doing a project for school. And in that project, he had to tell the teacher what he wanted to get his dad for Christmas. And this is a 5th grader. He writes, I want to give my dad the gift of family time.
Oh, man.
And boy, that was a gut punch, right? Of course, I traveled a bunch. I worked a bunch. But even when I was home, I wasn't really there. My wife would always tell me, like, Heath, you're here, but you're not here. And I was just captivated by this amazing device. I was captivated by staying busy. I was captivated by feeling important. So I would say a lot of the journey to, this new business we've created has been a story of personal failure, my personal failure. And I kind of woke up one day and said, look, I have got to be better for my family. And I want my family to be better because I can see on the horizon, my kids having their own devices, and I have been a very poor role model to date.
Yeah, goodness. Well, so, sort of implicit in some of the story you've already shared, you talk about the, sort of the hurry culture in your life and in your work that led up to the co-founding of this new venture. I wonder if you could just say a little more specifically about hurry and kind of how that came into play and how you began to realize that was the problem instead of a virtue or an asset.
Yeah. So I had always been associated with a mentoring group called Radical Mentoring in Atlanta. Wonderful guy named Reggie Campbell. He had spoken at our company offsites. I'd been a financial contributor to his mission, always believed in the mission, but I never had time to be a part of a mentoring group ever.
Oh.
I was always too busy, or so I thought. So it's funny. I was praying one year. I said, I really want to find a mentor. And I promise you, Alan, the next day I get a call from Reggie. And he says, Heath, I'd love to have lunch. I don't want any money, but I want to talk to you about something. And he invited me to become part of a mentoring group that next year. And I would say that was probably the most formational part of my journey, both in terms of, being a believer, but also in recognizing, the trajectory and the track that I was on. That program breaks you down a bit, but then it builds you back up. And after going through that, I thought, I'm just not focused on the right things. I'm really not focused on the right things. I went on to lead a group the next year of 6 guys, all high performers in their 30s. And what's interesting about that experience was every one of those guys was struggling with the same thing that I was struggling with. It was almost this recognition that, wow, this thing that I thought was my issue is kind of every high performer, career oriented person's, trajectory. And we've got to find a way to change that. So I would say it started with this idea of, this personal failure, moved to recognition. Then we did I did a bunch of research, how can I solve this, right? How can I be less busy? How can I spend less time on my phone? And then I started to shift into this period of hope. Like there can be a different way. I've seen others. Reggie was a good example. He lived a very different lifestyle than I was living. And he also had great career success. So there was a possibility of doing both. So that's where it all started. Just having someone wiser and stronger than me kind of speak into my life and tell me, hey, Heath, you can do better.
It makes a huge difference. Just somebody who's embodying a different, cluster of values, we could say, because we live in a world where hurry and fast is made a virtue and slow is horrible and bad, and don't do that. Except for the fact that some of the things that matter most to us can't be done fast,
Yeah.
Loving your kids, loving your spouse, being available to people, caring for their actual needs, all of that has to be done rather slow. And so, you share about your mentor. So how did that transition from a hurried orientation and assuming that is the virtue to beginning to see a different way that could also be successful or fruitful or productive or whatever ruler you want to measure it by?
Yeah, a few things. So first, self-awareness was key. Just understanding that this was something I was struggling with was leading me towards a different outcome. I did start reading a bunch of books. I picked up John Mark Comer's Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, to your point a second ago, I mean, one of the things that stood out to me in that book was Jesus walked everywhere.
Yeah.
But I was running through life, and most of us run through life. So my pace just wasn't congruent with the way that Jesus lived his life. And then the other part of that was, and I thought this one really kind of jumped off the page, was I think John Mark said, hey, if the devil can't make you sin, he'll make you busy. Right? Or in my words, I would say he will keep you captivated, right? By the next email, by the next social media update, by the next feeling of importance or dopamine hit. So it just started with that self-awareness. I then went on a journey to say, what can I start changing in my life? I did have a very significant career change at the time. We actually sold the business. And interestingly, I was supposed to stay on with the new acquirer a couple of years. I lasted about a year before I said, I'm just moving too fast. Like the whole point of building this was to have an opportunity to do something else.
Yeah.
And I'm going faster than I ever was. So I talked to my wife. We agreed. We said, look, it's time to exit. You're going to leave, some incentives on the table. That's fine. But you really need to, I really need to rest. And also I need to invest, like reinvest in my spouse and my kids and my friends. I mean, my poor friends, I never returned calls. It was just, again, I was too busy. I was too important to be a good friend.
Yeah. It really is something. I sometimes, I'll hear people talk about wishing they had more time, like they just don't have enough time. And I think I'm hearing in your story something that it sounds like you're discovering, which is sometimes the problem with not feeling like you have enough time is you're just not living your moments very much. You're just skimming over all of the moments we are in our hurry. And so we're sort of enjoying about 20 or 30% of what's happening in any given moment. And so we feel this profound sense of, I don't have enough time.
Yeah, it's so true. I think all of us have good intentions, but good intentions don't matter if your actions don't align with those.
Yeah.
And simple things like, hey, define what's important to you, right? Most of us would say these people in our family are very important, yet what we're doing doesn't align with that. So I've just really tried to take a step back overall in my life and say, hey, what do I want to be intentional about? And how do I align my actions with those intentions? Because otherwise, life can push you in directions. And I want to be in charge of that direction.
Yeah. And the rhythm of Jesus' rhythm of work and rest, we live in a culture with a really strong work ethic, maybe we're known for that around the world as a culture. Yeah. But we don't always have as great a rest ethic. We don't really know what that means or how that works or what that looks like. I guess I'm curious, especially as you've launched a new venture, which often is very demanding and takes a whole lot of time. What have been your own practices or rhythms that are helping you navigate the intensity of a startup and find ways to live a little less hurried inside?
Yeah. Well, first thing we did was build it into the ethos of the company. So my co-founder, Joey, and I, we said, look, we can't work and live like hypocrites if we're going to start a company that's focused on helping people, reconnect and disconnect and slow down a bit. So we have to build this into the culture and the framework of the company. And that's a conversation we have with everyone that's on the team. It's simple things like, even if I want to reply to a message in Slack at 11 p.m., it's probably not a good idea, right? Because I'm just going to demonstrate a connectedness that doesn't need to be demonstrated. So it's simple things like that, tactical things like that. The one routine I've started this year, and this is, again, a story of failure, but I would say for the last 10 or 15 years, I've had the same New Year's resolution, and that is to have quiet time every morning, with the journal, with devotional, with Bible reading. And usually I last about 2 or 3 weeks. And then I get really, really busy and I justify it with, well, I'm just too busy to keep up this habit. So this year, thank you. I've got your devotional that I'm looking at every day. So that's been great to keep me accountable. But I've also made it public that this is a goal of mine. So even within our company and publicly, even on, places where I'm posting, it's like, this is what I'm doing this year. I am going to do this every day. And I want you, the general public and my friends and family to keep me accountable. And my partner, Joey, and I, we will send each other a text every morning with a check mark as soon as we've done it. Again, just another level of accountability. Now, what's been awesome about that, so it can be anywhere from 7 minutes to 37 minutes. And some days it's devotional, most days it's journaling, Bible reading. I've got this chronological plan I'm reading through now. Yeah. Some days prayer, some days not. But it centers me. It really does. And it starts the day at a pace that's measured. as opposed to jumping right in to the deep end, which is what I had done for the past 25 years, candidly. So I just feel like I'm in a better rhythm and a better state of mind starting in the morning. I know others do it at night, so I'm not prescribing anything, but
Sure.
I'm an early riser. So for me, that's just been a game changer in terms of level setting the day, centering my mind, and starting things off on the right track.
Well, I'm wondering, it sounds like what you're gaining is a vision for how that moment in the morning, whether it's 7 or 37, minutes, how that's actually a place of receiving what you're going to then give in the course of your day of work. I think one of the reasons we struggle with a morning quiet time, or whatever label you like to use for that practice, is we don't see a connection between that moment and all the rest of the moments of the day. We think it's a thing we should do because, man, that's what good Christians do. And I want to be a good Christian. So I'm going to start my day like, good Christians do, as opposed to, wouldn't it be good to start my day receiving from God what I'm going to need to do the work and to care for the people and to engage all the good stuff God's prepared in this day for me to be a part of? That's a different vision than the perfunctory, here's what good Christians do.
And you're so right. And that's where I started. Every year I started with that. I need to check the box. I need to get this done. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. So you're right. That subtle shift in mindset is key. I'll also say that when you're quiet, I often find that the creative juices start flowing.
Yeah.
I rarely sit in a meeting where I'm, conversing with someone. I'm like, I've got an idea. I've got an epiphany. We were at a company offsite about 3 weeks ago, and we took 15 minutes. That's it. 15 minutes to write a letter to ourselves 1 year from today. What do we want to accomplish professionally? What do we want to accomplish personally? Anything. And it was in that 15 minutes that the biggest idea of the weekend came about. And it wasn't even a note we were writing. It was just a thought that popped into someone's head as they were going through that process. So I've come to really appreciate these quiet periods because it gets my mind way sharper than when I'm engaged in busy work.
I think that's exactly right. And that's maybe one more element of vision. I would say the same. I would say my best ideas have not come when I'm muscling my way into some brainstorming activity. They have almost always come as a gift in a place of solitude or quiet or, whatever. Some of the best solutions to challenges I was facing have come in places like that. Some of the best insights and best perspective have come in those places. So I think we often feel like we're going to earn the thing that we need, when really in the kingdom, we're going to receive the thing we need from a very gracious God. And what's it going to look like for me to cultivate the posture to be there when God's being generous? Yeah.
So true. And, for me as well, it's important for me, particularly with my kids. I talk a lot about, so my kids now are 16, 16, 14, and 12. So we've got 2 juniors in high school, a freshman, and a 6th grader. So there's not a lot of time in the grand scheme of things before they're out on their own. And whereas I was a fairly poor role model with devices, that's certainly gotten much better as we started this business. But I want to be a good role model and a leader for them to say, like, this time in the morning is important.
Yeah. Or
date night with your mom is important, or relationships are important. So versus work is important, work is important, work is important. And I think that's the best modeling I can do for them before they go out on their own in 2 years or 3 years.
No, I think you're exactly right. Well, so, this new venture, I'd love for you to talk about what it is.
Sure.
And sort of what has come out of, the research you've done, the assessing of the problem that you see, and how you're responding to that with an offering, really.
Yeah. So the impetus for RO was, again, me recognizing that our family was struggling with devices. And actually at the time, my kids were in middle school, so they didn't have a device yet, but I could see it, down there on the horizon.
Yeah.
And, I just thought to myself, there's got to be a better way. So I started doing research. Actually, it was at the same time I was reading John Mark's book, I was reading James Clear's book on atomic habits. And it occurred to me that we just haven't built a good habit or a system around where these things go when they're not in our hand. And as a result, our phones in particular usually end up in our pocket or right on the table in front of us. And I don't know about you, but if I have my phone, I am going to use it. It's almost reflexive at this point. I think most people would feel that way.
Yeah.
So I text my buddy Joey and I said, hey, I'm going to spend a lot of money to solve this for my family. And I think if I can solve it for my family, we can solve it for others. And it started with this simple premise is that we need to define a place. We have a place for other things. We have a place for our clothes, silverware, cars, books on a shelf, but we haven't defined a place for the phone. And then I went into the whole habit formation, the habit loop with James Clear. And I landed on there needs to be a beautiful spot, a beautiful place in a house that becomes the invitation to put your phone down when you're not using it. But it can't just be that. There has to be a reward. There has to be motivation. There has to be encouragement built around it. So we wanted to overlay an entirely, motivational system design aspect to it. So it is a combination of a place and an app that basically gamifies the experience of being off your phone. All the research will tell you 91% of us have our phones on us 24 hours a day. 89% of all distractions are actually self-induced. They're not notifications. It's us picking up the phone.
Yes.
And then this is not a statistic, but this is a statement that really drives me. We believe at RO that if we don't do something, this will be the first generation of kids that die with more memories of others than of their own. Think about that.
Yeah.
They're always looking outside for affirmation, comparison. They have instant access to any question, to any person all the time. And because of that, they spend a lot of time looking at others instead of making their own memories. And that just drives us to create a different outcome.
Yeah, that's so critical. Well, I wonder if you can say more about, as you've launched this resource and people have tried it on, what kind of a response are you getting? What are some stories you're hearing?
Yeah. So a story just last week, a guy named Mike in California, he has an 8-year-old daughter. She commented to him, they watched a movie together, and she told him, Dad, this is the first time you've ever watched a movie without your phone. Right?
She noticed that.
She noticed it. Yeah. It was very apparent. And what's great about that story, he didn't call and say, hey, we had this conversation, this one conversation I've been meaning to have for a year. All of a sudden, it's just this beautiful dialogue with my 8-year-old daughter. No, it was very simple and mundane. We watched a movie together and she appreciated it. Now, I suspect, and I've got older kids, and you will start to have some of those conversations that you want to have, but the phone has been in the way or something else has been in the way. We have a habit at our house, and we've seen a lot of our customers as well, where phones are up at family dinner, period, full stop, every night. And because of that, we have conversation every night as a family. And, that's somewhat of a lost art in American households. Even returning to something like that can go a long way. So there are stories after stories. In fact, at the offsite that I mentioned a few weeks ago, we actually spent the first 10 minutes reading story after story after story. Some will break your heart. We had a woman that purchased RO. She purchased it for her husband, but not for her husband to use it. She wanted to use it for herself on behalf of her husband. Her husband had almost died from a tragic accident. She was still spending all of her time working, and he just was very, frustrated with her. She said, I need to give him the gift of my attention. Therefore, I'm buying this for me. Whether or not he ever uses it doesn't matter, but this is going to be my gift to him. Because really what RO is about, RO is it's a platform. It's an in-home, we call it an in-home digital well-being device that just makes it easy for a family to disconnect. And once they disconnect, they have the ability to reconnect and connect on a much deeper level. And it starts to build these rhythms and habits and frankly, a muscle around, hey, this thing's not that important. And there are times when I don't need it. This device, Frank, is only 15 years old. We forget that.
Right.
And the once in a lifetime call is probably not going to happen at 5:30 p.m. on a Thursday. So there are times when it makes perfect sense to put it away And that's just, especially with kids and even with parents, I would argue we talk a lot about kids and how much they're on their devices. We parents are the ones that have modeled and taught them. We parents are the ones that instinctively reach for those devices. So again, just a beautiful way for families to reorient around life as opposed to devices.
Well, I mean, it sounds like, in a sense, what you've developed, this resource, is very much like what spiritual practices are meant to be, which is to make space for what matters, make space to notice God with you. And again, I said earlier, a lot of us talk about not feeling like we don't have enough time, but very few of us have ever assessed how many hours we're giving to our devices and whether we actually want to do that or not. And it sounds like your resource helps us, at least, if nothing else, and probably way more than just this, but at least it helps us realize how many hours we're giving to these devices.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the word notice, and I highlight that because the name Aro is actually a Maori word from a tribal language in New Zealand, and it means to notice. And our premise was, look, it's hard to be present. It's hard to be connected if you're not able to first notice, right? So everything is built on this idea of noticing.
Yeah, that's so good. And as you've been sharing the stories, I want to highlight, that I think a key focus of Aro has been especially to serve families. I happen to be in a place of life where my guys are all young adults now. Our oldest just turned 30, but it sounds like you've especially wanted to serve families. Why did you end up starting there?
Well, we started there because that's the phase of life we were in. And we really felt the pressure and the pain, honestly, of living in that stage of life. What's been really interesting, though, is when we identified the target market, initial target market for any new venture is really important. We thought it would be families with kids 11 to 14. They're just in that phase of getting a device. They're not so far gone that they're going to push back against, mom and dad. And certainly we have people that are buying it at that stage. But what's been so encouraging and awesome, honestly, it's actually the younger families that are buying it. There are so many forward-thinking parents that look at their family and say, we want to do it differently. Therefore, when Johnny or Susie is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we want them to see us living differently. So by the time they get a device, it's not ingrained in them that this thing is always in front of our face. That's what's been really fun. So, yeah. And man, what I would give even today to go back 10 years and to restart my relationship with my phone and my kids, viewpoint of that relationship through the lens of a platform like this in our house.
I'm so encouraged to hear about young families taking advantage of this and setting new patterns. That's really so good. Well, I wonder if you could just let our listeners know, how can they learn more about Aro?
Yeah, so we just launched in November, and we've been very fortunate. We've had orders every day since. So we're certainly striking a chord in the marketplace. The website is goaro.com. That's GOARO.com. We designed it to be a membership, so it's as low as $18 to get started. Man, we're just hearing so many stories, and funny enough, like, we're selling this across the US and Canada now as well. So, this isn't something that's just built for the Bible Belt. This is something that's resonating across, the entire North American marketplace.
Well, I don't know how big this will go, but if you travel around the world, you realize how omnipresent smartphones are.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where you are. You can be in a remote part of India, and there's everybody with their smartphones. So this need may be even greater than just our immediate cultural environment.
No doubt. Yeah, my wife used to do mission trips to Cambodia, and when the year she was doing it, there was a year pre-phone and a year post-phone, and even the orphans had phones. It's incredible. It's truly ubiquitous.
It is amazing. Well, again, today our guest has been Heath Wilson. We've been talking with him about Aro. It's a tool that helps families put down their phones to connect, relax, and recharge. Heath, thanks so much for taking time to share about this resource with our listeners.
Thank you, Alan.
Wasn't that a great conversation? Again, if you'd like to learn more about Arrow, visit their website at goarrow.com. That's GOARO.com. Arrow is built on the principles and science of habit formation, and it gamifies the experience of being off your phone. The Arrow Smart Box is beautiful, tech-packed, and it acts as the visual cue for you to put down your phone. I really do hope you'll take time to explore this resource further. And in the next few episodes, we'll be talking with authors Roger Parrott, Richard Foster, Brenda Quinn, and Ruth Haley Barton. I can't wait to share those episodes with you. Now, if you'd like to receive more help from Unhurried Living, I invite you to join our Unhurried daily email list. For 40 days, we'll send you a brief daily email that offers personal reflections from life and Scripture to help you take the next step in following Jesus' unhurried way. You can sign up on our website at unhurriedliving.com. We are honored to encourage thousands of leaders just like you. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to the Unhurried Living podcast. Join us next time to learn more about following the genius of Jesus' unhurried way of life and leadership.